Can a single diplomatic visit quietly reshape the economic and strategic balance of Southeast Asia, even as global supply chains fracture and rival powers compete for influence? One fact sets the stakes immediately. Trade between India and Malaysia already reached $18.6 billion last year, and leaders on both sides now believe that figure can move sharply higher. What this video uncovers is how a short, two-day trip by India's Prime Minister signals far more than symbolism, pointing instead to structural shifts in technology, defense, and regional alignment whose outcomes are not yet settled. If this effort succeeds, India could lock in a deeper role in Southeast Asia's manufacturing and security architecture, while Malaysia gains leverage as a technology and logistics hub between the Indian Ocean and the Pacific. If it stalls, both countries risk losing momentum to faster-moving competitors, from China's entrenched supply chains to US-backed frameworks seeking alternative partners. Failure would reinforce fragmentation at a moment when semiconductor shortages, food insecurity, and defense realignments already strain governments across Asia. To understand why this meeting matters, you need to see the longer arc. India and Malaysia established diplomatic relations in 1957, the year Malaysia gained independence, but for decades ties remained functional rather than transformative. Trade expanded gradually, with India's economic liberalization after 1991, and by the 2010s, bilateral commerce hovered in the low double-digit billions. Strategic cooperation, however, lagged behind economics, constrained by geography, different threat perceptions, and Malaysia's careful balancing between larger powers. That balance is now harder to maintain. India's economy crossed the $3.5 trillion mark and is projected to grow above 6% annually, while Malaysia's export-driven model depends heavily on electronics, which account for roughly 40% of its total exports. Semiconductors alone contribute more than 25% of Malaysia's exports, making it one of the world's top chip assembly and testing hubs. At the same time, India has launched incentive schemes worth over $10 billion to build domestic semiconductor capacity, from fabrication to packaging. This is where recent developments converge. During the visit, both governments formalized 11 cooperation agreements spanning semiconductors, defense collaboration, disaster management, and peacekeeping. These were not abstract promises. They establish working mechanisms for technology sharing, joint training, and regulatory coordination. Leaders also reaffirmed plans to expand local currency settlement, reducing reliance on the US dollar for cross-border trade, and insulating transactions from exchange volatility. Trade remains the backbone. Bilateral trade stood at $18.6 billion last year, with palm oil, petroleum products, electronics, and chemicals dominating flows. Both sides now openly aim to push that number higher, betting on faster customs procedures, investment facilitation, and targeted industrial cooperation. For India, this supports its Act East policy, which seeks deeper economic and strategic integration with ASEAN. For Malaysia, it diversifies partners at a time when global demand is uneven and geopolitical risk is rising. Defense cooperation adds another layer. India has expanded naval deployments in the Indian Ocean, while Malaysia sits astride the Strait of Malacca, through which about 40% of global trade passes. Joint exercises, capacity building, and peacekeeping coordination strengthen maritime security without formal alliances. This approach suits Malaysia's non-aligned tradition while giving India a larger operational footprint in Southeast Asia. Consider the first what-if scenario. What if semiconductor cooperation accelerates faster than expected? Malaysia's existing ecosystem could combine with India's scale and incentives, to create parallel supply chains less exposed to US-China tensions. That would reshape investment flows across Asia, attract multinational firms seeking redundancy, and subtly dilute China's dominance in certain segments. It would also bind the two economies together through long-term capital commitments. Now consider the opposite. What if execution falters? Semiconductor projects are capital intensive, with single fabs costing upwards of $5 to $7 billion. Delays, regulatory friction, or talent shortages could stall progress. In that case, India's ambitions would remain aspirational, and Malaysia would continue to rely on established partners, limiting the strategic payoff of the partnership and reinforcing existing hierarchies. Another dimension is diplomacy beyond economics. Malaysia's support for India opening a consulate in Sabah on Borneo Island signals attention to subnational engagement, trade facilitation, and diaspora links. It also reflects Kuala Lumpur's confidence in managing domestic sensitivities while deepening ties with a major power. For India, this extends its presence into East Malaysia, closer to maritime routes and emerging growth corridors. These moves also sit within a crowded geopolitical field. The United States is advancing trade frameworks and security partnerships across Asia, while China remains ASEAN's largest trading partner, with trade exceeding $900 billion. India is not trying to displace either, but to insert itself as a consequential third pillar. Cooperation with Malaysia, an influential ASEAN member, helps normalize India's role as a regional stakeholder rather than an external aspirant. The second what-if scenario looks at security. What if maritime cooperation deepens in response to regional instability? Enhanced coordination could improve surveillance and disaster response across the Indian Ocean and South China Sea approaches. Alternatively, if regional tensions spike, Malaysia may pull back to preserve neutrality, testing how flexible this partnership really is under pressure. Ultimately, this visit underscores a broader pattern. Middle powers are no longer waiting for global consensus. They are stitching together pragmatic partnerships, anchored in trade figures, industrial policy, and shared risks. Power here is not about declarations, but about execution timelines, capital flows, and the ability to align interests without locking into rigid blocks. As you watch what happens next, focus less on rhetoric and more on follow-through. Track investment announcements, semiconductor project milestones, defense exercises, and whether trade numbers actually break past $18.6 billion. In a region where stability and competition coexist, the India-Malaysia partnership offers a case study in how states try to expand influence quietly, balancing opportunity against uncertainty and integration against the ever-present risk of strategic drift.